Hey everybody, wanted to come at you again with a little more content from the content minds here after another remarkable week in American politics and a remarkable pick by the Harris campaign to tap Tim Walz as their vice presidential pick for the campaign. The commentariat, the political commentariat, has really had a few days now to chew on this, and I've found it really fascinating, kind of the diversity of opinions kind of coalescing into two camps, right? The Tim Walz pick is safe, the Tim Walz pick is risky, and this really seems to track, to some degree it seems to track just on ideology, right? The Wall Street Journal, unsurprisingly, says this is a really risky pick, or the Miami Herald or something like that. CNBC, I think, was another place where you could see, this is a really risky, how could they be this risky, right? I think the Bulwark podcast, which is sort of my access into conservative thinking that I can sort of not agree with, but tolerate. They seem to sort of feel similarly that Shapiro would have been a safer choice. And then alternatively, you have, your ABC News is, maybe your 538s, some other kinds of folks saying it's a safer pick, but this is sort of the paradigm, right? It's safe versus risky. And in sort of learning more about Tim Walz, I'd known about him previously, but not frankly that much, just having watched obviously stuff back with the George Floyd protests and then some of the blue trifecta in Minnesota, and looking admiringly at some other things that they've been able to pass. That was my familiarity with him. But knowing that, and then kind of getting more plugged into his personal life, his political history, all these things, it started to occur to me that it's not a super helpful paradigm to think about this pick through. It's not really a safe or risky question. I think the diversity of takes on this and the way these different organizations have fallen into one camp or the other at about a 50-50 rate shows you it's really not an effective tool to think about his nomination. And I think that's part of the point, right, is that he's very difficult to pigeonhole. And that's really, he can kind of be all things to all people. As a governor, he was obviously quite progressive. As a House member, he was actually one of the more conservative Democrats in the House for his time there. And obviously his personal affect and his personal story kind of gives different hooks of access to whether you're a fairly conservative swing voter and you like his stance on hunting and guns and fixing your own car and whatever else, right? Or if you're a very progressive person who's really interested in marijuana legalization or something, right? There's a lot of different ways to find him accessible, which I think is why, whether it's risky or weak, I would argue it's a strong pick, right? It gives people a lot of different on-ramps into being interested in this campaign. But even more than that, I think thinking strategically, which is hopefully what the Harris campaign is doing, there's really two ways to think about winning in general, right? Whether it's, in lots of different avenues. And one way is to think about hitting your opponent where they're weak, right? Hitting them on the things that make them vulnerable. And the Democrats have done this, and the Harris campaign has done this quite successfully with Trump for years now, pointing out his sort of threats to democracy, his incredibly unsavory personal life, and criminal past, and all these things, right? We've heard this ad nauseum, and I think those are effective and in my obviously true things to say, but they've also kind of been maxed out. Anybody that's remotely aware of U.S. politics, which unfortunately is, I think, most of us at this point, they've already made their mind up about whether that concerns them. I think it's of limited utility to continue to push. Obviously you need to continue to push that, but it's of limited utility in terms of winning over swing voters or undecided voters in battleground states. It's just not. They've squeezed that, whatever, orange, lemon, whatever. I don't know what the metaphor is, but they've gotten all the juice out of that they can. At least I think that's their thinking. That they've kind of started to near the point where that's maxed out. So the other alternative is, in thinking about how to win something, how to win a competition, is to start to attack your opponent where they are perceived to be strong. And for the Trump campaign, this really revolves around this kind of reactive, regressive, hyper-patriotic, hugging the flag. And again, these are assertions of the campaign. I think things the campaign has tried to establish. I'm not saying these are things that are actually true. But in addition to this sort of hyper-patriotism, there's also this hyper-masculinity, right, that they tend to kind of weave throughout their public appearances, throughout their speeches, throughout the entire kind of Trump paradigm, right, is very much based in the idea of a strong man, right, a strong man. And I think what the Harris Walz campaign has done with this choice is, and why it really came down to Shapiro and Walz, is you needed some kind of way to compete on that terrain, to compete on the terrain of an authentic, maleness in politics. And you need this, I think, there's an argument here that this is just balancing, right? This is the same as Mike Pence with Trump or Joe Biden with Barack Obama. And I think that's true at face value, but I also think it's deeper than that in this circumstance because we are experiencing such a crisis of masculinity. And when I say that, I don't mean to sound like a manosphere person or like there's some kind of zero-sum game here with the different problems we experience in society. I would say that we're sort of in an omni crisis, right? But one of those crises, and it's a crisis I can speak to, obviously, is the crisis of masculinity and the crisis of so many of our social problems relating to men and our inability to construct positive male role models, essentially. And I think Tim Walz really allows, through his authenticity, which is a weakness of the Trump folks in general, and his sort of authentic access to this sort of Midwestern dad, you can fix your own spark plugs, let's go to the state fair kind of turkey is a vegetable kind of attitude, right? Is this something that people have really been hungering for and are really interested in learning more about? So again, I think that's sort of my point here with this video, and I don't want to belabor it too much, but just moving away from, I think, this sort of pretty standard view of thinking about vice presidential picks and sort of is it safe or risky, and thinking more about what does it allow the campaign to do that it couldn't do before. And I think what Tim Walz does for the Harris-Walz campaign is allows them to play on that field. It allows them to talk about the prosecutor and the coach. It allows them to make a concerted, intentional, and authentic play for some of that space. And I'm not saying that because of Tim Walz they're going to win over 75% of the white male vote in America or something. Obviously, this is all about margins and is all about marginal gains. But that's really, I think, what's driving this isn't them hand-wringing over whether this is super risky or not. It's a very interpersonal thing. It's a very, as people have pointed out, a very vibes-based thing. And this is also where I think some of the commentary, it tends to overcomplicate this, right? It is to some degree, very importantly, and this is where wonkish people kind of lose the script sometimes. Is yeah, policy is important, but the Biden administration and the Trump administration before it, if it's shown us anything, it's that there's a limit to that importance of policy in sort of the media zeitgeist, right? There's a limit to how much normal, regular people care about any of that, and there's a reality here that elections are popularity contests. They are referendums on who's more likable, who's more interesting, who people find to be more authentic. And that's really what they're doing with this pick, in my opinion, is not sitting back and thinking, how do we do no harm, or how do we, make a risky thing to get more libs, or whatever whatever that kind of logic is, as it's proposed by sort of the political cognoscenti. It's much more, how do we make a play for new people? How do we make a play for people we don't have access to now, or maybe that the Biden campaign didn't have access to? In particular, in Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, right? How do we get to these critical people that we think we need to be able to win over? I guess I should add North Carolina in there as well. But some of those places, they're going to look at Kamala's own biography. Georgia would be a good example of a place, or North Carolina, where they're going to think, okay, we've got some new juice here. We can kind of can move into spaces here where we can become hyper competitive and really put the state into question and into play. Walz obviously gives you a completely different group of people who resonate with his biography, with what he's bringing to the table. And he's deeply popular, right? He obviously has that kind of, as we've already seen with the sort of memification of Tim Walz, he's got that Max Weber kind of idea of political charisma, right? I mean, you say charisma and you're like, okay, I don't know if I'd say he's George Clooney or something, but I mean it in sort of the Weberian sense of, a political persona that people find deeply relatable, whether they completely agree with everything he says or not. They sort of find that personal side of him to be accessible, and that will bring them into learning more about, what is this policy position, or what is the full position of the Democratic Party on healthcare or tax cuts or whatever it is, right? Like, you have to have that charisma lead up front, and in this circumstance, you want to have it channeled to a person that lets you compete on that new terrain and really run right at the Trump campaign on the issues that it thinks are its strongest issues, right? So, as always, really interested in your comments. I've been getting some great ones lately that, when I started this channel, it was all about, could I, engage with some of these topics, whether it's AI or international relations or American politics, just things I'm interested in that I'd like to think more about, and then get these comments back from y'all and become smarter and think and really have a space to think more about it. And that's really been happening more and more, and that's really exciting for me. So as always, love to read the comments, and I try to respond to all of those when I can. So thanks again for watching. Have a good one.